Hello Reefers, it is Felix, and this is the first iteration of the Deep Dive podcast. Today's episode is about keeping Acropora with Leonardo from Leonardo's Reef as our special guest. We've covered quite a wide range of topics that should be fantastic for both reefers who already keep Acropora, as well as anyone who would like to step up their game and wants to learn a bit more about keeping them directly from the king of Acropora himself. Please leave all your comments and questions below. We will reply and answer all of them. And on top, we will pick one thoughtful comment or question to receive a gift card for Leonardo's Reef. They only ship within the EU, so if you're from the EU, just mention that on top of your comment or question to enter the drawing. The winner will be announced 2 weeks after upload of this video on my Instagram and has 2 days to claim their prize. This podcast format is also a bit of an experiment, so if you all like it, I'll find more guests and record more episodes. So let's dive in. So I guess you should start with an introduction, who you are, what you're doing, what your experience is and why you're here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me in the first place. I'm Leo from Leonardo's Reef. I'm a coral farm in the Netherlands, and we have been professionally farming Acropora for, I think, more than 6 years already now. And that's very short what I do. And we are based in the Netherlands, and we ship corals throughout the whole of the EU, the whole of Europe.
And you do exclusively Acropora, right? It's not just any coral, it is all about the acros, right?
Yeah, it's 99.9% acros, as I always say, because we do have a few Montipora or Anacropora, but yeah, most of the corals that we farm are Acropora.
Yeah. Where can people find you? Where can people buy your corals if they're interested?
Yeah, mainly through the website, leonardosreef.com, but they can also send me a message through Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp, and just ask me a question directly, asking for recommendations or something they are looking for specifically. So that's the easiest way to find us.
Perfect. There you go. Right. Let's start easy. Not everybody is able to keep Acropora yet. So when, as a reefer, do you know that you're ready for Acropora? When would you recommend to start trying acros?
I think you can start immediately, but maybe that's not the most popular answer. But it really depends what kind of Acropora you're starting with. The most important thing is that you don't start too soon, but that counts basically for every coral. So I think you should have the tank, let the tank have a good cycle first. That means the tank is balanced out. The bacterial cultures are all well established, and then you can basically start with acros if you want to. But then go for the more easy corals like the green slimer, the staghorns, or some Tortuosa, Ostera types. I think they're almost as easy as your typical Stylophora or Poecilopora. So it's definitely a good starter coral. But if you're really unsure, if you know the basics of reef keeping, you can always start with some easier corals like zoanthids or leather corals, and if you get the hang of it, know how to test and how to adjust parameters, then start with the acros.
Right. So there are definitely acros that you say are easier than others. So there's, even within Acropora being like the crown jewel of corals, right? The most difficult, the most challenging. There are still species that are fairly easy to keep, even for beginners.
Yeah, I would say so. There's a wide variety in difficulty in Acropora, and I think that makes it, for me, also the most interesting species, because there's such variety, not even in growth form or coloration, but also in how difficult they are to keep or how difficult they are to color up. And it's really a sport to collect those corals that are very hard to keep, very hard to grow, and very hard to color up. And if you're really able to make those grow and color up well, then that's quite a challenge. So that keeps it interesting for us.
Yeah. So why do you think some Acropora are easier to keep and some are more difficult to keep? And how can you tell?
Well, it's very hard to tell. I think it's easiest to just ask an experienced reefer which species are easier to keep and which are harder. I think in general, just has to do with the species and how susceptible that species is for changes in their environment. And I think that has to do anything with evolution. Some species grow in areas that are very, susceptible to variations in water parameters. So they're much more hardy than species that grow on very pristine reef with very constant parameters. So it's just a difference in species mostly, I think. And to find out which are the easier ones and which are the harder ones, you can, I think, best take the advice from experienced reefers or people like us, farmers who grow them for a long time. I know all my species. I know which are very easy to keep and which are very hard or very vulnerable. So I can definitely give you advice which ones to start with.
So essentially you can't just see, that acro is easier, that acro is more difficult. You just have to rely on the source where it comes from to tell you this one's easier, this one's harder.
In general, you could have some broad guidelines. Most staghorn corals, which are the branching type of acros, those are in general easier to keep. And the very fine branched corals, acros, are much harder to keep. That's a very broad guideline, but there are always exceptions. So it's best just to ask advice to me, for instance, or to any other experienced reefer. So I think that's still the best thing to do.
It's interesting though, because you still can generalize it and say, okay, shallow water acros are easier and deep water acros are more difficult. Because you can find very easy and very difficult acros in either environment, shallow and deep.
Yeah, and I think shallow and deep water is a very artificial way to separate Acropora into species, because there are a lot of exceptions to the shallow or deep water. So it's very hard to say which corals are shallow water corals, which corals are deep water corals. Plus, they're very Acropora can adapt to different parameters. So some deeper water corals can be adapted to very high light and the other way around. So it's very hard to say deep water and shallow water species, and also their difficulty is not really related to that. So I think if there's any broad guideline, you should go for maybe growth form. The branching acros are easier, and the very finely branched acros are harder. I think that's the thing to go for.
Yeah, have you got an example for the finely branched ones and the easier ones?
Well, easier ones, the green slimer, the branching green slimer. It's one of the easiest acros, and a very hard Acropora is the Acropora speciosa, for instance, which is very, very finely branched, has very thin coralites, and it's one of the most difficult acros to keep. Yeah.
Let's do the opposite. Let's name one each that's like the opposite. So a staghorn that's really difficult and a finely branched acro that's really easy. So if you still want that, but you want the easier option, then there you go.
Well, now I have to think. I think one difficult branching Acropora is the Acropora exquisita, which is also a branching staghorn type of coral, but much harder to keep, actually. Same is the Acropora huxamai, also very beautiful, also kind of branching, but also quite difficult to keep.
You just named the two blue ones, the two blue staghorns.
Yeah, in general, they are blue. Yeah, for sure. And a fine branched coral that's easier to keep, maybe Acropora hyacinthus. You could consider that a fine brancher, is not very difficult to keep. Another one, the Acropora loripes, also not the most difficult coral actually to keep. So they're very variable, and it's very hard to broadly put them into groups. And I think that's also the most interesting thing about acros.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that brings me to like the next thing is like identifying acros, because there are how many species of Acropora? Like 400 or something?
I've no idea, because it changes all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, with all the DNA research that has been done the last couple of years and still ongoing, species are also cancelled and new species are added. So I'm not sure about the current number of species.
But we're in the hundreds, right?
It's definitely in that ballpark, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's not always easy to identify a specific coral. A lot of people ask for the species, and the best we can often do is like give an best educated guess.
Yeah.
What it is, or what it's often referred to, just as like a name to identify that one type of coral, even though it might not actually be the species it is. So it's not always possible, right, to give an exact identification on it.
I think in most cases it's actually not possible, because within a species there's a lot of variety. First of all, the currents, the flow, and the light intensity changes coral structure, change the structure of the colony, the growth form. So there you go. Even circumstances can change the appearance of a coral, and then you have many different different local varieties of species, because a certain species from Australia looks different than the same species from Indonesia. Plus, in aquarium environments, they also, in many cases, grow very differently than when you just import them. So I think identification, in most cases, is an educated guess and a rough area where probably the species is in one corner or the other, but to really pinpoint the exact species, I think it's a very hard thing to do without any DNA research. So for our hobby, I think an educated guess is enough in many cases, but it's very hard to really ID a species based on the appearance of a coral.
But like you said, it's not super important really for the practical application or for having it in an aquarium. It doesn't matter. It's more for us as the hobbyists to like identify a coral. So when I'm talking about, I don't know, Acropora hyacinthus, it's more the tabling shape that comes to mind, or when I say a red planet acro, which is the Acropora hyacinthus, right? That's more just to identify it amongst other enthusiasts to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it can also be useful to determine where to put a coral in the tank, because there are definitely species that need more flow and more light than others. But if you're a little bit in the ballpark of where you want to go, let's say if you're not sure if an Acropora is a Spathulata, Hyacinthus, or Millipora, it doesn't really matter, because they all demand the same amount of flow and the same amount of light. So if you're close, in most cases, it's already enough to determine where to put a coral in the tank. So you don't really need to be very exact with your ID, but if you have a rough idea what the coral might be, in most cases that's enough to determine how to care for that coral. So
perfect. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. That's essentially everything that matters.
Yeah. Basically, that's the most important thing. Why you actually want to know which species it is. Next to, it's nice to put a name on the coral, of course.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing to know which species it is to properly take care of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's already challenging enough.
Yes, can be very challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's actually a perfect segue into the next topic, because you are, and I'm going to crown you the king of Acropora.
Well, that's your words, not mine.
Those are my words. Yeah, you're the king of Acropora. And I get asked a lot on all my videos about all the basics, especially chemistry and water parameters. It's like probably the most discussed area of things. or one of the most discussed topics when it comes to Acropora.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have a lot of opinions. I just want to know, what is your go-to set of water parameters? What do you do in terms of chemistry to keep your Acropora happy? Because you farm corals. For you, it's more than just a hobby.
Yeah.
A lot more hinges on it. You have so many corals. What is the way to go for you?
Well,
let's start with just the parameters, the basics.
Yeah, the basic parameters are basically close to natural seawater. And the most important reason for that is that we still do water changes. Of course, we take out water with shipping corals, so we have to add, new salt water to put it back. But also we do 10 to 15% water changes a couple of times a month. We used to do it very rigid, strictly every week, but we have been a little bit more relaxed with that. But we try to do it twice a month at least. We just try to keep it on the same parameters as the salt that we use, which is Tropic Marine Pro Reef.
Yeah, perfect. People were going to ask anyways.
Yeah, and that salt roughly is more or less natural seawater parameters, except for the DKH, which is slightly higher, 7.5 to 8, which I also prefer to keep it in the systems. And other than that, differently from natural seawater is our phosphate and nitrate levels. Nitrate levels are typically between 0.5 and 2.
Oh, so very low.
Quite low, and I don't really change anything to those numbers. I just let them fluctuate by themselves. I don't add any nitrates manually. And for phosphates, we try to keep them a little bit higher than natural sea level, and that's roughly around 0.08 to 0.1 even. And that's substantially higher than natural seawater levels. And we noticed corals just have better coloration and are just overall more healthy since we start keeping the phosphates a little bit higher. So that's roughly what we do. Calcium is around 420, 430, potassium around 400. So everything is basically pretty standard. We keep the parameters in line using the bulling ABC, so the full bulling method, accompanied with the trace elements A and K. And those are basically trace element mixes from Tropic Marine, which contains the most important trace elements in one mix. And we don't really have to manually adjust individual elements anymore. Everything is pretty much balanced. The only thing we add manually is a little bit of zinc and a little bit of selenium. But it's only in some systems. Some systems are pretty much balanced, and other systems have different consumption of certain elements. So we have to manually adjust those. And one system uses a little bit more zinc and selenium for some reason, so we add that manually. Yeah.
So do you think those individual elements contribute to any color changes, growth, like speed up growth or anything, or do you just try and keep those levels at natural?
First of all, I just try to keep the levels optimal because you never know, right? But all depends on which element it is. But let's take zinc, for instance. I think zinc is a very important element for overall coral health. So we definitely notice a difference when we keep that in range. Compared to when we just let it go too low and do nothing to manually adjust it. So depends on the element, but I think it's important to keep the elements roughly in range. It can be a little bit on the low side or a little bit on the high side for some. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be spot on, but you should keep it roughly in the ballpark of being optimal, especially when you want to keep the more difficult Acropora. It's important to keep an eye on every element.
But you don't think that any specific element is responsible for a certain color? I think that's what a lot of people still think. There's a lot of products that sell you trace element mixes to boost one color, like a red or a green or a purple. Or is it just all the parameters need to match? You don't boost any certain color with any certain element?
Well, first of all, I think all the elements combined, it's like a multivitamin. So they're all together, they're all important for overall coral health. And I think a very healthy coral will display the most beautiful colors, first of all. Then second of all, I think there are some elements linked to some certain colors. For instance, fluorine, iodine, could be linked to blue coloration, and there are a number of other ones. I don't know them on top of my head, but I think overall you need to keep the parameters in check to make your corals very healthy. Also to keep nutrient levels in check, not too high, but certainly also not too low, to keep the corals well fed and healthy, and then they will display the most beautiful corals. And next to that, you also need some sort of stability, because fluctuating parameters are also not good for coloration development. So keeping it steady in the optimal ranges are best for coloration, I think.
But you don't dose any specific element just for that. You just stick to your elements A and K.
Yeah, I just see it as a multivitamin, like I said, and I think everything is important overall for the health. And an overall good health of a coral makes the best colors. Yeah.
Do you ever dose strontium separately?
No, not separately anymore. When we were a little bit lower in our A and K dosage, we did have to add some strontium once in a while, let's say 4 times a year. But now that we increased the A and K elements a bit, which also contains strontium, we don't have to do that anymore. So it's in line with the usage now. Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Let's see. Are you still there? Oh no. Are you still there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Something lagged. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, then let's talk about nutrients. You mentioned feeding and nutrients is probably the next biggest thing next to your, well, when it comes to water chemistry, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But next to your actual elements, your nutrients are really important.
Yeah.
And so you already mentioned you keep nitrates somewhere between 0 and 2, somewhere in the readable range.
Yeah.
Phosphate, a little bit higher, up to 0.1 even.
Yeah.
Which I also agree with that. I also always noticed a lot better colors when the levels are a bit higher like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. But do you dose any extra food or amino acids or anything?
No, not really. We do feed a lot, and we feed a lot of different kinds of food, myces, zooplankton, phytoplankton, all frozen. So they all come in cubes and big frozen packages. So we feed quite heavily every day, but we only feed the fish, and the corals are basically fed indirectly. We do feed some powdered food once in a while. We use the Phonomer in Coral Sprint for a while. So we from time to time dose a little bit of that if we really want to boost the nutrients when the nutrients are a bit low. We also have some Easy Reef, the stuff from Easy Reef. What's the name? I don't even know.
The plankton concentrate.
Yeah, it's a concentration in those big bags. Evo SPS, I think the name is. So if nutrients are a bit on the low side and we cannot keep it up with feeding, we do feed those liquid foods, which can really boost the nutrients in a very effective way. Yeah, so that's what we try to do, but we try to focus on just feeding fish. Yeah.
Right. Just the fish get fed. Well,
Yeah.
So did you notice any changes in polyp extension when you do feed those mixes versus not feeding and just letting the fish do the rest? Or is the little bit of leftover, it's kind of broadcast across all the corals, is that enough already?
Yeah, I think the broadcast and what the fish, I don't rinse the foods, first of all. So there's a lot of very fine particulate stuff in there anyway. I always cut the flow when I feed the fish for half an hour, so the corals also get the time to absorb everything that's floating around. And I don't notice any difference in polyp extension, to be honest. I never seen any acro actively eating any particle. I always try to spot it, but I never seen acro actually eating. I'm not sure if it's even a thing, but I just focus on the nutrient levels, and that's basically my feedback. If I'm feeding enough, and if those are in check, the corals are happy and well fed. And even when they don't pick up any particulate food, they still can absorb the nutrients, the phosphate and the nitrates from the water column. And I think that's enough. I think all the coral feeding is a little bit overrated, and in most cases, you just feed your algae. I think when you feed the fish, of course, the waste products of the fish are basically dosed in your tank all day long in very tiny amounts. So it's actually a very good way to feed your whole system, to feed the corals. That food is also a little bit pre-digested. Of course, the fish digest all the food, so is not so heavily polluting anymore like any liquid or fine powdered food, which it's really easy to overdo, I think, especially in a home tank, in a smaller volume tank. It's very easily to overfeed those types of foods. So I think it's best to just stick to feeding the fish. And if nutrients are still low, you can add some extra fish maybe. It's always nice to look at.
Who doesn't like that?
Yeah. So, and just try to stay away from any liquid or powdered food unless you really cannot add any more fish and you're still limited on nutrients. So that would be my advice.
All right, perfect. So, as an add-on to that, do you think there's a benefit to feeding amino acids for a polyp extension? If you say, my polyp extension isn't too great, and then people often recommend amino acids because they kind of create like a bit of a feeding reaction in the corals, and that is supposed to make the polyps extend a bit further. Do you ever notice any of that? Or
I think when your polyp extension is not optimal, you should find the cause and not try to fix it with adding aminos, because polyp extension is a very good indicator of coral health. And if the polyps are not really fully extended, there's something wrong. Can be flow not being sufficient, light not being sufficient, can be water parameters that are off, or even coral pests. So try to search for the root cause of the lack of polyp extension instead of try to fix it with a product that basically doesn't fix the underlying problem.
I like that,
Yeah, having said that, I don't notice any difference in polyp extension actually when I used any of those products. Next to that, I think when you feed your fish in that frozen food that you feed, so much amino acids and protein and everything comes out of that food while you're feeding it, especially when you don't rinse it. I think it's much better to feed that than to just feed something out of a bottle that has a shelf life of 2 years or longer even. I think it's better to just use the fresh product out of the ocean that has been frozen. I would always prefer that instead of something out of a bottle, to be honest.
All right.
Maybe it's just a feeling. It's not based on any science, but that's just how I do it. Yeah.
Well, I've seen your corals in person and they're amazing. So you're doing something right. And if that's your way.
I would like to give you my secret, like this bottle you need to buy and then everything is going to be okay. But I don't think I think the most important thing is to keep everything simple. So focus on your parameters, good flow, good lighting, using high quality foods. And then you are pretty much, are, I think, at 90% of what you need. And the rest is just fine tuning. And definitely if you don't keep the most difficult corals, that fine tuning is optional. You don't even have to do that. But if you want to get that fourth color on your tenuis, okay, then you need that extra 10%. But if you don't care about that, you can have the most beautiful tank with just sticking to the basics and just be on top of your parameters and just
Yeah, you mentioned good flow and good lighting. Well, I guess lighting would be the next biggest thing because Acroporas, they are photosynthetic, right? They have 6
for sure, yeah.
So I guess that is also part of what they where they get their energy from. So you have a bit of a different opinion on lighting?
Well, I don't really have. I don't have an opinion. I just have. I would say my opinion doesn't really matter. I think only my experiences matter.
Then tell us about your experience.
Yeah. Because I don't really care about anyone's opinion. I just care about. I only listen to people that actually tried something, and not tried for one day, but they tried for a longer time and compared it with something else. I think that's most interesting to listen to. So that's always what I try to do myself as well. And in the farm, we tried many different lighting setups. We are using T5s, mostly in combination with some supplemental LEDs.
Which is funny, right? Because usually it's the other way around in home tanks. You have loads of LEDs and then, let's get, you can even see it here. Some extra T5 on the sides. T5. Yeah, there you go. But for you, it's the other way around. It's all T5s and then a bit of the LED for the pop.
Yeah, it's mostly because we use the ATI hybrid fixtures, which is mostly T5 with a little bit of LED.
Exactly, yeah.
For our show tank, we use halides with additional LEDs. So also the LED is supplemental in that setup, but now supplemental to the metal halides. And we also have some setups which are smaller, more like test setups with LEDs only. And the LEDs that I used so far is the Radions as a standalone, so full Radion. I used the GNC Blu-ray X lamps from Italy. GNC lamps, very beautiful lamps as well. And we have been using the Orphec OR3 bars for a long time. I also like them a lot, but also mostly as supplemental to the D5s. We used one tank with the OR3 bars alone. And that also was pretty amazing, to be honest. So I think all light setups could work. To make a long story short, but you just have to implement them in the correct way. And I think with halides and T5s, it's very hard to make any mistakes. And I think with LEDs, it's easier to make mistakes when buying and setting up a tank with LEDs. So I think it's harder to get the same results as we used to get with halides and T5. And in most cases, it has to do with not using enough lights, LED lights, or using the incorrect spectrum. So for T5s and halides, the spectrum is not adjustable. It's just, you can change bulbs, you can tweak the spectrum a little bit, but mostly it's a set spectrum.
Well, you can choose the bulb colors. So which bulbs are you using?
Yeah. But even with choosing the bulbs, even the blue T5 bulbs are pretty much, they're not very narrow in spectrum. They're quite a broad spectrum already, even though they're blue T5 bulbs. And they're much broader in spectrum than the LEDs could be, because LEDs have a very narrow spectrum from themselves, and you have to combine different types of LEDs to create that broader spectrum. Same for halides. It's just one bulb, you screw it in, and that's the spectrum. You cannot adjust anything. You cannot even adjust the intensity. With metal halides, it's just on and off. With T5s, you can also dim them. Something we actually don't do. For us, it's always on and off for all the T5s as well. And the problem with LEDs is that you can tweak the spectrum, you can make it super blue, but most people don't make it full spectrum enough. So I always recommend to my customers to run their LED fixtures at very wide spectrum, basically all channels at 100%. From blues to greens to yellows to blue to reds to whites, everything at 100%.
Just utilize everything you have.
Yes, for at least 6 hours a day, and you can of course change the intensity. Maybe all channels 100% is very intense, but then dim down everything at the same rate, right? But just make that very broad spectrum that we also used to have in T5s and halides, and try to mimic that in your LED setup. And next to that, try to, I see people buy, for instance, one XR30 lamp, which is a radion lamp, on a, let's say, 80 centimeter tank or 2-foot tank. While for almost the same money, you can always buy two XR15s, which are basically half the size of the XR30. And maybe they're $20-$30 more combined to one XR30. But then you can just split up that light and you have two light sources instead of one big one. And you have better spread over your tank. So spread, I think, is a very challenging thing to accomplish using LEDs, which is very easy with halides and T5s. So not buying enough lamps and not using the right spectrum, I think, are very important mistakes that are made with LEDs. But in my experience, if you utilize LEDs the right way, they can achieve the same results as T5 and halides. So it doesn't really matter what you use. It's just how much user friendliness do you want. Aesthetically, how do you want it to look in your living room, for instance? So I think that's also important factors to take into account. And if you avoid these two beginner mistakes, I think you can achieve very good results with LEDs when you want to grow Acropora.
Right. So any light can be used to achieve
everything can be used. Yes.
Anything can be used. Anything goes.
Yeah.
Well, at least anything designed for reef tanks, I guess.
Yeah. You cannot light your tank with candles, but you know what I mean. If you use it the right way, it doesn't really matter what you use. I think. But you
still choose mainly T5, and one thing I've noticed with your acros is that they grow really, really fast. So do you think that the T5 is like the one factor that makes them grow really fast? Is there more in the T5 spectrum that LEDs just cannot offer? Is it more complete?
Well, we have a spectrometer to really test what the actual spectrum is that we give to corals, and I think I can give the exact same spectrum with LED lights as I do with my T5s. So the spectrum is really not the issue. I think if you, for instance, use the Radion Pros, they have a very wide full spectrum setup. So you can definitely achieve the same spectrum with those as with your standard T5 bulbs. I think the spread is maybe a different story because T5s have very good spread, as you may know. And to achieve the same spread as with T5s, you need a lot of lamps, which can be very expensive. The initial cost is very high to buy those.
To kind of blanket your whole tank in, let's say, a radion.
Yeah, I think you need a radion every 30 or 40 centimeters. And because our tanks are 1 meter deep, you also need 2 or 3 rows of those. So it can become very expensive very quickly. So when we built the farm, built the farm 4 years ago, we made the decision to go for T5s because the initial cost was much lower. If we would have done everything with LEDs directly, I couldn't afford that at the time. But maybe over time, if we find a lamp that's affordable enough and gets us the same results as T5, we will definitely switch over one tank by the other for LEDs, because you never have to change bulbs anymore. It's very easy to adjust the spectrum a bit, or the timing a bit, or the intensity. So it's very user-friendly. And if it gives us the same results and the initial costs are bearable, we will definitely do that. Yeah.
So it's more also the running cost of the LED, of the T5s that kind of get you in the long run, because you have to change your bulbs every year. But in terms of like the consumption, it's very much the same as LEDs. So you wouldn't really save much in terms of consumption.
No, I think you save a little bit in changing the bulbs. But like I said, the initial cost of those LEDs are much higher. So I'm not sure how much you actually save because you never know the lifespan of a LED lamp. They say they last for 50,000 hours. But I don't know. I don't know if that's true. And if you have to get them repaired, of course, there are also costs involved in that.
I think the average hobbyist wouldn't even wait that long before they upgraded their lights, because we all need the next best thing when it comes out.
Yeah.
I think
that's true.
People don't run their LEDs into the ground anyways. They just
sell them and buy a new one. Yeah. and what you said is very true. I think if you do LEDs well, you maybe save 10-15% of electricity cost, but it's definitely not going to be more than that, because if you want to do LEDs well, you definitely need a lot of LEDs, and it's not going to be much of an energy saver compared to T5s. Maybe to halides a bit more, but definitely to T5s, it's not going to be a huge energy saver for sure. Yeah.
So why do you think everybody's going for LEDs? That's like the default go-to nowadays. Why is T5 dying out?
I think the lamps itself, they're bulky. So, you need to drill holes in your ceiling. They're heavy. They make sound. They have fans. You have to change the bulbs. You have to store the bulbs. It's just not so easy you cannot adjust them. So you cannot adjust the spectrum when you come home in the evening, get it more blue. Whatever everyone enjoys, most people enjoy in the evening. So I think mostly it's user friendliness. They're just more industrial, basically. So for a farm, they definitely make sense for large setups, but for home tanks, LEDs make much more sense nowadays, I think. I do have a small tank at home, small reef, just a mixed reef, and I also use LEDs at home because it's just, in your living room, it's just much better to have LEDs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of true, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the spectrum. When we use LED lights, we should utilize everything we've got, not just the blue channels, even though everybody likes the blue channels.
Yeah.
But what's like the rule of thumb that anyone listening to this could follow if you have LEDs at home? how do you set them up to provide the ideal lighting and spectrum for specifically Acropora?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the light gurus in the US, Sanjay Yoshi, maybe you know him. He was a big halides fan for, I think, 15, 20 years. And he's also a scientist who is, I think, a PhD in the science of light. So he knows a lot about lighting. And he was always a very big advocate of using halides. But at some point, he also changed over to the radion lamps. And first of all, he used a lot of them. I think his tank was covered in radions, first of all. But he also used all the channels at 100%. And his acros were phenomenal. They're very fast growing, very beautifully tabling, so very natural growth forms. And that was basically the first tank I saw, which convinced me of the fact that, okay, you can achieve the same thing with LEDs as you can with D5s or halides, because I never believed it, to be honest. But this is already quite some years ago. But then I found out he actually run all his channels 100% for at least 6 to 8 hours a day. And I think that's the most important. A lot of people are very afraid to use a lot of their warm whites and cool whites because they're going to burn the corals. I'm going to bleach my corals. But I think actually the opposite is true. If you only give a lot of blues, especially a lot of 450 nanometer, and you don't give anything else, I think the corals don't really get that light, or they don't understand. And I think it's very easy to bleach them that way, in my experience, instead of giving them the whole spectrum and dim the lights a bit, you know. So what I would advise, if you set up your lighting, to make a very long, otherwise I keep rambling, give your corals at least 12 hours of daylight in total, like 12 to 14 hours from sunset from dusk to dawn, basically. The first hour you can do very blue, and then go to full spectrum after an hour, and then give 6 to 8 hours of full spectrum. And I really mean all channels are 100%, or all channels at 80%, all channels at 60%. You have to figure out, you know, your intensity, depends on your rockscape, the type of coral you keep, but just all channels at the same height. So use that wide spectrum, you know.
Don't be afraid.
No, just put it up as much as your blues. And then in the evening, you can, you know, tune down the wide spectrum a little bit to have a little bit more, viewers experience. But just those last 2, 3, 4 hours, you can do blues, but just give that 6 to 8 hours of full spectrum. That's key.
I think a lot of people don't like the white lights as much because you see the algae more. You see all the nasty bits. The cyano pops more. The algae is bright green. The water looks yellow, and you can see if there's tannins in the water. But in the blue light, all of that is suppressed. But all the good stuff, all the fluorescent is amplified. So visually, your corals also just don't look as good under that full spectrum. It's just true. Maybe except for the very blue and very pink corals, but all the other corals, they look a little bit more drab than under popping blue light. But actually, if you give your corals that full spectrum during the day, they will reward you for that in the evening, because of that very broad spectrum, they will develop much more different pigments during the full spectrum period. And in the evening, you can enjoy those with your orange glasses or without. And really observe that, because you give them that full spectrum during the day. So just, you know, if you don't like that full spectrum look,
just give them that full spectrum when you're out for work or study or school or whatever. And when you come home, program it that way. And you can even do like in the weekends when you spend more time at home, you just give them only blue in the weekends, and during weekdays you give them the full spectrum. That's even possible. If you can program your lights this way, it doesn't really matter. There's also cloudy days in the wild, so light also has some different spectrum, some different intensity in the wild as well. So as long as you don't play with your sliders every day, then the corals will definitely adapt to any program that you give them. So there are many options.
Yeah, weird one that I've heard of is instead of doing like blue in the morning and then your full spectrum and then blue in the evening again, I've heard of some people do like 6 hours of blue followed by 6 hours of full spectrum, or the other way around, which I've always found to be a bit strange. But I've actually ran that setup because it kind of aligned with my my time I spent at school. So I was like, okay, in the morning you get all full spectrum, and then at night it's all blue, like for 6 hours straight, because that's when I'm home.
Yeah, that will definitely work. That's perfect. What I actually do is a little trick that I use is I ramp up my lights fairly quickly after in the morning. They all go to 100% within 15 minutes, actually, to get the pH up as fast as possible. And in the evening, I have my evening schedule is 4 or 5 hours of blue light. So it has much more of a very slow evening with a lot of blues and going down very, very slowly. So my mornings is a very quick, intense schedule. Then it goes to 100% for 8 hours. And then after that, it's a very, slow descending into the night, which allows me also to work in the farm in the evenings. Because we also have to work in the evening sometimes. So I need some light, Yeah, you touched on something very interesting. So in the morning, you say you ramp up the light really quickly to get the pH up. So obviously when corals photosynthesize, they produce oxygen, right? Yeah.
So that raises your pH.
Yeah, for sure.
So that is a noticeable effect in the morning that you do notice that?
Oh yeah, that's a very quick, immediate effect that you will notice if you use a pH controller or pH meter with some sort of app you can read, you can see that effect immediately. Yeah, it has a very dramatic, big effect. It's not only your corals that start to photosynthesize, but also the algae on your windows and your stones on your rocks. So it's the algae combined with your corals, everything in the tank that starts to photosynthesize. And you want to keep the pH as high as possible. And of course, the late morning, just before the lights go on, the pH is typically the lowest in your system. So if the light switches on, you want to get that pH up as soon as possible. So that's what we do.
Interesting take. Yeah, I might have to shorten my sunrises on the tank now.
Yeah, for the fish, 15 minutes of waking up is basically enough for them. So
just not to shock the fish in the morning.
Yeah, so I do ramp up a little bit, 15 minutes, and then I just go all the way, and they're all happy, I think. So
yeah, we're a bit past the water chemistry, but why would you keep your pH as high as possible? For the people that might wonder, or what do you aim for in terms of pH at the farm?
I don't really aim for anything. I just aim for the highest possible, which is definitely above 8.1, lowest, and highest 8.4, 8.5. I definitely don't want to let it come below 8. I think that's my most important rule for pH. And of course, pH has everything to do with the rate of coral growth, because corals grow easier with higher pH. Probably there's still some debating about that, but I think the overall consensus is that corals grow better in high pH.
I mean, it's what most people also observe at home, that if you aim for a higher pH, or I shouldn't say aim for a higher pH, I should say you want to avoid the low drops.
Yeah.
So you don't want it super high, right? But you just don't want it to drop really low. You want to avoid those, like a lot of people struggle. I've struggled, especially when I ran the calcium reactor. The pH drops to 7.8, 7.7 even. You really do notice that the corals slow down a little bit, even though you keep super stable parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, with a calcium reactor, it's very hard to keep those numbers up. Another reason, and that's a little bit anecdotal, but I heard that from Adam from Fragarage. He had a thought, and he said he always noticed that all the STN of his colonies always happened at night. And he always asked, why do corals STN overnight?
Why do you wake up in the morning and my prized colony I've been growing for 3 years is suddenly all white?
It always happens at night. And he thought, well, what's different at night? Well, first of all, there's no light, but can that be the reason, right? But he also said maybe it's just the pH is at the lowest. So maybe the corals are just at their most vulnerable at night, or under the most stress at night. Keeping that pH up and getting it up in the morning as soon as possible could be beneficial. It's all anecdotal, of course, but
makes me wonder if that might be connected with Acropora polyps opening up much bigger at night. Maybe because the pH is lower, they extend.
I think that has to do with. Well, I think it has to do with respiration. I think at night maybe respiration is different. I think mostly that's the feeding response because there's no light anymore. I'm not sure if that's really linked to pH, but could be for sure. Just overall try to keep your pH as high as possible, which also means you have to take care of ventilation, because low pH is in many cases caused by a lot of carbon dioxide in the surrounding air. So definitely, if you have a tank in your living room, make sure there's enough ventilation to keep that pH up.
Yeah, I'm a bit of expert on that topic in my little room here. Always struggling with low pH.
Yeah. For us it's easy, but for us it's much easier. Big farm, not a lot of people. Very good ventilation system installed. So our CO2 levels or carbon dioxide levels are always really low, which really helps with keeping the pH up. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you recommend to increase pH easily for anyone at home if you struggle with low pH? So like you said, first check what your CO2 levels are. Open a window.
Yeah. Open a window, or if you have mechanical ventilation in your house, just always put it at not the lowest setting, but medium setting. Definitely when you have company, when there's a lot of people in the house, really open a window then and make sure there's enough fresh air coming in. Next is just keeping your alkalinity steady, definitely above 7.5, because alkalinity can buffer your pH levels. So if you have very low DKH, actually your pH can drop a little bit more. So keep your alkalinity a little bit higher if you struggle with low pH, 7.5, 8, I would say. Maybe keep it a little bit on the higher side, around 8 if you really struggle with it. Use a good skimmer, because aeration, getting rid of that carbon dioxide in the water column is also important. So having a good, big enough skimmer, and basically that you can use kalkwasser, for instance, if you really struggle with keeping pH up. But those are more advanced solutions. I think I would start with those basic things, and if you still struggle with low pH, you can always use kalkwasser, for instance, to boost that pH a bit.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, I've really tried everything you can to raise my pH, to really avoid those low dips, especially with the calcium reactor. I got really desperate. CO2 scrubbers, drilling through the window frame to get a hose outside for the skimmer's air intake, route that outside the window. Of course, those are like really drastic measures. I feel like the average person, the average reefer should not have to resort to such measures. But I mean, a lot of people do it. You read it all the time. And yeah, that higher pH, that higher low end of the pH you're looking for, it does make up for, does make up for better coral growth, right? So
yeah, for sure. And I think also overall health for the corals is improved if you keep the pH a little bit higher. Just try to do everything you can within reason, of course. Don't drill a hole in your house without consulting the rest of your the people in the household. But within reason, just try to fix it, like I said, with ventilation or better aeration with a skimmer. And if that doesn't work, try to boost it with some kalkwasser.
Perfect. Another thing people often refer to is for aeration is surface movement. Nope, this side.
Yeah.
This side, where we at? Here. Surface movement. What do you think about surface movement?
Yeah, it's important as well. It's basically the same as what a skimmer does. Surface movement is definitely important, especially when you have a small skimmer. No skimmer. Or no skimmer, then it's really the only way of aeration almost. So don't underestimate the effect of surface agitation when it comes to gas exchange, which means CO2 out of the water and oxygen into the water in general. It can have a pretty dramatic effect. So some good amount of surface agitation can really help.
I mean, I've seen at your farm, you have some crazy amounts of flow in your tanks, in your systems. You have way too many wave makers, more than probably anyone would ever have in their home tank. So it's very important for the surface, but also, to keep the flow going through the whole colony and to get the detritus out of the system. Flow has many benefits for the system overall and for the corals. Acropora especially, right? They need probably more flow than most other corals that we keep.
I think in general they need the most flow of all the types of corals that we keep. So you definitely you can never have too much flow. You can have the wrong type of flow, but never really too much.
What's the wrong type of flow for anyone wondering?
The wrong type would be like a very narrow blasting stream right onto a coral. It's a little bit of a no-brainer, but corals don't really like that.
Even Acropora.
But very indirect, chaotic, random flow. You can basically not give them too much of that because it always comes from a different side. There's some breaks. There's some, you have moments of low flow and then you have moments of very high flow. So corals can have a very short break. Sometimes 0.5 seconds or 1 second is even enough. But if you hit that coral with flow from all sides and different intensities, you can never give them too much, I think.
So what do you think is the ideal flow for an Acropora then?
Yeah, I also explain it in my videos on my YouTube channel. I don't want to pitch them too much here.
Okay.
But I think very strong random flow, which you can achieve with 2 pumps or more, basically blasting into each other and creating some turbulence. That is probably the best flow for acros, but not necessarily the best flow to export your nutrients, because flow is also important to get all the nutrients and the detritus from your tank into the overflow, which then can be taken out by fleece filters, skimmers, any other filter media. So next to keeping your corals healthy by providing them with fresh water, with new nutrients, a lot of oxygen, etc. Flow is also a very important thing to export your nutrients into the overflow. And for that, random chaotic flow is not the best one. You can better use some gyre motion for that, which you can achieve with, let's say, one big pump in the back, blowing across the backside and creating some sort of big vortex. And ideally, that vortex ends up in your overflow. So you can do it on opposite side of the tank and just move all that water through the tank into the overflow. That's a way, or create a vortex with a couple of pumps and push that water into the overflow that way. So that's how you utilize different types of flow for different types of results that you want to achieve.
So I guess one parallel to lighting would be to also not just don't get one wave maker that's rated for your tank size. So get multiple smaller ones if you can, to have those options.
Yeah. You can spend your money on one very big one or two or three smaller ones, which will be slightly more expensive when you buy, let's say, one 10,000 liter an hour wave maker. If you buy two wave makers of 5,000 liter, it's going to be slightly more expensive, of course. And you have two quarts instead of one. It's a little bit more cleaning. It's a little bit more of a hassle, but the benefits are much, much bigger because you have that flow coming from two sides. You have much more options in creating random flow patterns, etc. So, my lesson would be go for the two pumps and not for the one big one, and go for two lights instead of one big one. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So what I noticed at your farm is that you, not anymore as much, last time I visited, but the first few times I've been at your place, I've noticed you've always grown ginormous colonies of Acropora.
Yeah.
And the kind that you would find when you go snorkeling in the ocean, the kind of corals you would find in a lagoon, big tables, round table, perfectly shaped. So what do you think is the main factor that made you achieve those results? Because a lot of people in their home tanks, they grow acros, they grow them big, they grow them well, they're beautifully colored, but they always look a bit weird. The shapes are always funny. They're not super round and perfectly shaped as in the ocean. So what do you think is the main factor for that?
Well, I think the most important is just light spread. You need a very uniform blanket of light to achieve that type of coral growth. We also use bare bottom tanks. So next to the fact that we have that blanket of T5 lighting, it also bounces against the bottom pane, which is painted white. It goes back up again. So you have basically light coming from all sides. I think that's an important factor. Second of all, the very strong random flow. If you have flow coming from all sides, like I told, you create that very even shape of a coral. And if you have flow coming from one side always, then you get a weird shape of coral growth. So that's also an important factor. And you explained a little bit that we don't have a lot of large colonies anymore, and maybe it's interesting if I explain a little bit about that,
tell us.
what the reason is. Because I basically learned my lesson with growing very large colonies, which of course looks very cool. And when you're a coral farm, you have to grow colonies, right? So that's what I was doing. But then I noticed keeping big colonies is actually more challenging than keeping 4 or 5 smaller colonies. Because a large colony is very hard to keep alive, because it's very hard to get the flow into the coral. Detritus will actually build up in that coral, or algae will go into the coral, and it's very hard to inspect the coral. Just if you have smaller corals, you can just pick it up and look at from all sides, like, is it healthy? When you have very big, chunky colony, it's hard to handle, it's hard to inspect. So we actually experienced some STN in those big colonies because it was just impossible to get the flow in the centers. When you have a 40, 50 centimeter colony in a quite shallow tank, it's just hard to create that flow. If you have a very deep, big tank, it's easier, but in those very shallow tanks, it's quite hard. So what we did, what we're still doing right now, is we try to keep multiple smaller colonies and frag off of those instead of keeping one big one. Also for redundancy, when one of those colonies isn't doing so well or dies or whatever, we still have at least 2, 3, 4 backup colonies, which also make redundancy much easier. We almost never lose a species completely anymore, which I think is very important because collection and finding new species actually takes up most of our time. So if you lose it, it's just a waste of effort and time, and it just hurts a bit, So that's how we do it nowadays, and I think it's makes much more sense. Although when people visit us, they will say like, "Where are all the big colonies? I thought you were a coral farm." So I always have to explain, yeah, but this and this and this and this and this is actually the same colony. And instead of one big one, we grow out 4 or 5 smaller ones. So, yeah, that's the reason.
Well, that's a pretty good reason. I guess it's also more efficient because you have more leading growth on a smaller colony versus a big colony because the center doesn't really grow much anymore.
The center doesn't do a lot. So, it makes more sense. You have more active growth tips. So there are a lot of reasons to not grow big colonies and to cut them up a little bit more often. Yeah,
I was just still thinking in my head why I've never seen anyone that has as much flow in their tanks as you. Like you have like crazy like 2-inch standing waves in your tank. And still you struggle with like keeping big colonies, and your colonies were like 30 to 50 centimeters at least, right? Some of those millies were pretty big.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking in the ocean, you don't just have flow coming from one side, because in our tanks we have one wave maker and it's kind of just blowing from one direction. Even if you have it set to random or alternating or whatever, the flow always kind of comes from the side. So it kind of just hits the side of the colony. Yeah. So if the colony grows like a table, it still just hits the side. Whereas in the ocean, the flow is much more 3D. The flow kind of comes from the bottom. The flow comes from the top. A wave crashing down on top of a colony. Stuff like that. It's not really happening in our tanks, is it?
It is quite hard, and especially in shallower tanks, like typical farm setups, it's quite hard to do, because to get that flow coming from the top, you need a large volume of water above that coral. So you need a tank that's much deeper, like 60, 70 centimeters, and have a lot of wave makers actually above that coral that then break into each other and push the water down. But in a very shallow farm system, that's impossible, because you have the surface, right? All the corals are a few centimeters under the surface, so you cannot really push that flow over the coral to get through the center. So that's definitely the limiting factor of growing that type of big colonies in a shallow tank. So you really need a deep tank for that to keep those. And even then, I think it's very challenging. And I'm always very impressed if I see people with mature Acropora reef tanks with very large colonies. And it doesn't have to be the most special signature whatever coral, even if it's a green Millepora and it's 50 centimeters across. I think that deserves the most respect, because it's definitely not easy. There's a lot of dedication to have a coral growing to that size and create the stability over multiple years. So it's quite an achievement to keep colonies as big as that, healthy, and especially when you grew them from a frag, it's definitely very impressive. So,
yeah, especially if you, like you said, over years, right? that's not just years of time that's gone into it. It's also years of no mistakes, no slip-ups, no Murphy's Law, messing with your tank. It's really like multiple years of everything going just right for that coral to achieve that.
Yeah, just years of discipline, basically, because probably you don't want to do that water change. You don't want to, you don't want to do that maintenance. You don't want to clean that pumps. But to really, if you slack and you have that size of colonies, your colonies will, they will punish you and they will bleach. If your flow is suboptimal, if your pumps are dirty, you will be punished. If you have frags, a little bit less flow, they will survive. Those big colonies, they will definitely, they won't appreciate that.
Well, if it takes you that long to grow, how long does it take from a small 1-inch frag to, let's say, 1 foot, 30 centimeter in diameter colony?
Really depends on the species, but I think when you go for let's stick to the example of a Millipora.
Millipora, perfect.
I think if you put it under the surface and you give it a lot of light, a lot of flow, it takes a couple of years. Let's say 1.5, 2 years at least.
At least.
Yeah.
I mean, growth in a sense is exponential to a degree.
For sure.
But so they grow faster when they're smaller. But
probably that frag, the first half year,
it's not going to do much.
It's not going to do much. And then you see all of a sudden 4 branches popping out and you're like, wow, what's happening? And the 4 branches will be 8 branches 2 months later. And then it just takes off. You see the foot becoming large, and then then you basically start seeing it grow every day if it's going well, and then you suddenly have 200 branches growing, and frags in the beginning, it can look like nothing's happening, but sometimes you need to be patient, and then all of a sudden they're more or less like exploding in growth.
That's actually a good subject. What is normal in terms of growth? Because I wrote down in my notes how to hack your growth, how to speed up growth. But maybe we should talk about what is a good speed of growth for an Acropora. I feel like nobody ever talks about that because you have so many different species, and it depends, right? So what you as a farmer of Acropora, what is the growth that you can expect from a coral?
Well, with the fastest growing species, and that's probably staghorns or millies, it's going to be maybe close to 1 centimeter a month. But that's definitely not going to be 12 centimeters a year. And what I mean by that is that also a coral go through cycles, and sometimes they grow really fast for a couple of months, and then they just dial back a bit and just grow a little bit more in the base, or just don't grow for a couple of months that much, and then they are deciding, okay, I'm going to form new branches again. What determines that cycle or difference in growth speed, I don't know. But sometimes when a coral is in a growth spurt, it can definitely grow up to almost 1 centimeter a month for sure. Per branch that is, of course. So
that would be a really fast growing acro.
Yeah, that's
a centimeter a month.
Yeah, that's fast. For me, maybe for some farmers that's rookie numbers, but for me that's fast. Yeah.
I mean, if you get 1 centimeter a month on the right coral, I mean that's pretty good.
But like I said, that's then going to be a couple of months, and then they will probably slow down for a while again. So it's never going to be. You cannot translate that to 12 centimeters a year, because that to keep that pace up for a year, I don't think that's really possible. Maybe also not for that coral itself to keep up that pace, but also maybe it's sometimes when the stars are aligned perfectly, then all the parameters for growth are optimally, but just to keep it in that zone. It's just very hard,
So, and on the slower corals, what would that be? Like, what would be a really slow coral? Slow Acropora?
Loripes can be slow, can be quick, but in most cases slow. And then you're talking about a couple of centimeters a year.
So is that because it has fewer polyps? Do you think that's a contributing factor on the slow growth?
That is a theory, that they just have less opportunities to feed, so there's less energy coming in. But also their skeletons are much harder. So I'm not sure if that's because they grow so slow, or they grow so slow because their skeletons are so hard. But slow growing species are centimeters a year. Also, tenuis can grow quite fast, but in most cases is also quite slow grower. And then we're also talking about centimeters a year, 5-6 centimeters a year, maybe maximum. So that's also medium to slow.
Yeah, because a lot of people always say, "Oh, my corals are growing so slow; they don't grow much at all." Like, figure out what coral you have. Maybe it turns out it's actually not growing all that slow. Some corals just grow so slow you don't notice they grow. Yeah, I always like taking. That's actually why I started. funny story there. That's why I started with Instagram. I just started taking pictures of my corals to follow how much they've grown over time, right?
Yeah.
So I think taking some pictures, and then maybe it turns out if you're doing everything right, your corals aren't growing slow. They just grow so slow you don't notice.
Yeah, true. It's also because you look at them every day. You think they're not growing, but they're actually growing. Yeah, for sure.
Well,
So you definitely, it's good to keep some diary in photos or whatever to really track that growth. Yeah.
I think that's just a very good thing to do in general.
Oh, yeah.
No, but what would be a good growth hack? How could you speed up the growth?
I don't believe in any hacks. I think the best hack is just don't overcomplicate it. Just stick to the basics. And if you get those basics right and you are consistent and you can keep up that discipline to clean your pumps, to do your water changes, and that's already hard enough. Not the first half year, but the first 5 years, that's, it's pretty challenging to do that every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So don't make it too difficult. I think nowadays that's actually the hack, and that's the secret, because a lot of people they think they should make it more difficult than it actually has to be. And if you really want inspiration for that, just go to the Reef Central archives. It is and was a very big forum, a bulletin board. And you can browse through the Reef of the Month section that they used to have. And they would spotlight a reef every month. That was the Reef of the Month that month. And it would be Reef of the Month by popular vote. So people would vote for their favorite tanks, and the one with the highest vote would be Tank of the Month. And when you go back 15 years and you see the acros and the colonies that people grow and the lack of products and equipment that they used, even I have to go back sometimes to remind myself that don't overcomplicate things, because you can achieve that with very minimum equipment and very minimal products. So for everyone that's listening, just check it out, because it's really funny, and it's actually quite impressive to see with the little amount of equipment and products what kind of results people achieved even back then. That's definitely recommendation. And to come back to what my point was.
Wait. Has your reef ever made it as the Reef of the Month?
No, I have been thread of the month, which is the second place, I guess. I never been Reef of the Month which is still
not even the famous Formosa Forest.
No. It wasn't. I think it was in voting once, and it ended up being Thread of the Month, which is basically like second place. And I never got first place, and I that will never happen anymore, obviously, because the forum is pretty dead, unfortunately. Yeah, all forums are nowadays, except maybe for Reef to Reef, which is pretty active still. So that's a little bit sensitive topic. So no, it isn't. But the Formosa Forest was definitely my most famous tank back in the days on that forum. Yeah,
a little bit of a side topic here. Back to growth. What can you do to achieve a bigger colony faster? I was thinking maybe you just start off with a bigger frag.
Yeah, that's basically that's a hack.
That's like cheating, I guess. Yeah. I mean, if you'd start off, but the thing is, right? You can't start off with a colony, because then people might think, okay, I start off with a colony, it's already going to grow really fast. But there are challenges that come with that as well. So what's like the ideal starting size? Of course, you don't want a frag that's like teeny tiny. You can count the polyps on one hand, but you also don't want to start off with a big colony if you can even find one.
I think, I thought about your question. If I approach it differently, I think for sure you want to have an aquaculture frag, because that will start growing much faster because it's already adapted. So that's actually a hack. Just start with aquaculture. Second of all, the corals that we sell, they always have active growth tips already, because typically when you make a frag of a coral, that frag is basically cut off their mother colony, and that frag is in shock, is literally in a shock state. So if you glue that frag to a new plug, it will definitely encrust in 2-3 weeks. That's not an issue. You can let it encrust. But to make it grow again, so to make the tips actually active, that can take up to 2-3 months, because that frag really have to basically reboot and reinvent itself. Like, oh, I'm an own colony now. I'm on my own, and they actually need some time to adjust. And before they start actively putting out tips again, that can definitely take 1-3 months. And we never sell a coral without active growth. So we always wait for that coral to be rebooted, basically, and in the state of growth again, not in the state of repairing itself. So definitely, if you buy a coral that has been fragged a couple of months ago, is aquacultured, if you put it in your tank, it will basically continues to grow immediately. It doesn't need time to adjust. And it doesn't need time to heal from the fragging anymore. So it will basically continue to grow. Second of all, like you said, the very tiny, small frags, they typically need much more time to adjust. I think because there's just not so much biomass. So the bigger you make the frag, let's say if you make a frag 3-4 centimeters, which we always try to make them a bit bigger, because they heal and get back to growth much faster than the small ones. So that would be the hacks, between quotes, that you could use.
But that's already a hack if you can buy a frag that's healed, growing again. I mean, you're already. I mean, that's like what, a few months, you said, is what it takes from cutting it off to it growing again is a few months, and that's already time that you save.
Yeah.
Which, again, growth is exponential. So those 3 months are definitely going to pay off. But also, I mean, the fastest growing coral is usually an alive one. There's no need to, have a fresh cut frag. It's stressed from the fragmentation process. And then you bring it in your tank, it's double stress because it's a new environment.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's why you hear like frags typically need a lot of time to start growing again, and you see a lot of typical when a customer put a frag in a tank, there's a bit of encrustation, and then nothing happens anymore, right? So we try to prevent having customers having that experience, because I want my customers to come back. And it sounds stupid, but I think customers come back when they put a coral in the tank and it just continues to grow. So that's basically what I try to do. And you definitely need your frag to heal up for at least 2-3 months before it reaches that state of growing again, like I just explained. So that's what we always try to do. One exception, when we do CTO, cut to order, we typically ship within 2-3 weeks after cutting, and then it just definitely needs a little bit more time to adjust. But customers always know that they buy CTO compared to fully healed frag. So people know what they buy. So typically that's what we try to do. So if you want to get a colony as fast as possible, just try to find a big frag with active growth tips, and you're set. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess don't stress out if your coral doesn't take off immediately.
No,
sometimes
they always need sometimes at least maybe a week or a couple of weeks to adjust, right? Lights are different, flow is different, but not more than that. You should see growth within a couple of weeks for sure.
Yeah, perfect. And that was growth. What is your go-to hack for coloring up corals? Especially, you've mentioned it earlier, if you want the fourth color on your tenuis. Let's say you're having struggles with the first two. Let's say you got let's say scenario, you started out with one of your tenuis frags. It comes perfectly colored. It has like 3-4 colors. It looks brilliant. So you started out with a healthy frag. You know what it's supposed to look like. You put it in your tank and it turns all green, or it turns all brown. Where do you go from there?
Well, first of all, get your parameters in check. And then I mean all your parameters. So do an ICP, preferably ICP MS, because you can also get the traces very accurately. Get those in check. Get your stability in check. Make sure parameters are quite stable. Make sure flow and lighting is in check. And then just have patience. Because with tenuis, coloration takes months to develop, and they can take days to disappear.
That's the sad part, isn't it?
Yeah. So I also buy frags from different farms, and most times I try to go in person, and then I see the frags in their system, and they look absolutely fabulous. And then I take them home, and then they're in the car for, let's say, 6 hours, 5-6 hours, depends where I go. If I go to Germany, I'm like 5-6 hours in the car. I come back, I put them under the blue light, and that 5% of that best color is gone. And that's how fast it can go. And over the following days, it becomes probably even worse. And then it needs weeks to months to get back into full potential. So, yeah, that's basically the sport. That's definitely not the case for every coral. Let's take a PC rainbow, also a very famous coral.
Yeah.
You can put that in shipping 24 hours and it will come out as beautiful as it is when it got in. So definitely not the case for every coral, but for, let's say, those most finicky, super sensitive corals, even if you look at it too closely, it already those colors are gone. So that makes it a big challenge. I don't think there's really, to come back to your question, I don't really think there's a hack to coloration. I would say optimal parameters, stable parameters, sufficient flow and light and nutrients. And next to that, like I said, a lot of patience.
Yeah.
I think that's what you need. And that's already very hard actually to achieve. But that basically sums it up. And there's no bottle or elixir or I don't know what, you can...
No snake oil, silver bullet out there.
I'm not saying it's a snake oil. Maybe they are tools, but I think there are tools when everything else is in check. And I think most people try to use those bottles before everything else is in check. So I would try to focus on those major factors first, and then try to improve a little bit more with the bottles.
Yeah. What was it? Another thing that I've noticed is I've always I feel like I've always struggled with yellow Acropora specifically. I remember it was your all yellow, solid yellow Acropora latistella, and I could somehow never get that yellow coloration back.
Yeah.
And then tweaking too much, it just messed up some of the other corals.
Yeah.
Which I guess is another great point is just because one coral isn't showing its fullest peak potential, but all the other corals don't mess things up just for one coral. Like how important is the looks of that one coral versus all the others?
Yeah, you cannot make every coral happy at the same time. That's also something you have to accept.
I mean, you're keeping a few hundred different acros, right?
Yeah,
so
but they're not all at their peak at the same time. That's just not going to happen. So sometimes certain corals at their peak state, and then another time another coral is. So,
but I mean, you've also got different systems for your different corals.
Yeah.
To address that. So for most people at home that have one display tank, it's just not realistic to keep every coral, every Acropora at peak health, peak looks, whatever.
Yeah, and especially when you have a mixed reef, then it becomes even harder, right? So even with only acros, it's already challenging. But if you keep also different types of corals, it becomes even more challenging. So yeah, for sure.
But that's why we're here. How do we get the fourth color on that tenuous?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another last thing I've got on my list. I guess the other major point for Acropora that we haven't really talked about, which is a major challenge for some people, pests, really.
Yeah.
Because your light, your flow, your water parameters, it can all be perfect. And all be ruined by one little pest. Yeah. So what is your take on pests? And what do you think is the worst pest for Acropora to have?
Ooh.
When are you lost?
Well, first of all, I think most reefers underestimate the risk of pests and also having a pest. And I think everyone has to go through that experience at least once in their life to really realize how devastating it is, and basically means you have to completely restart your tank. Otherwise, you will always be, you have to try to live with the pest instead of eradicating it, because eradication basically means breaking down your whole tank in most cases. When you encounter any bugs, red bugs, white bugs, any other bugs, there is a full tank treatment possible with certain risks. But if you have flatworms, Acropora eating flatworms, that's basically the end of your system. You can definitely live with them, but that means you have to blow off the corals on an almost daily basis. Growth will be reduced, coloration will be reduced, overall health will be permanently reduced. So your tank never gonna reach full potential anymore if you have that infection going on. And
so you can live with them, but you're never gonna get that peak anymore.
No, you're never going to get that peak anymore. Plus, you live with the knowledge that your tank is infected, right? So I think Acropora eating flatworms is definitely the biggest nightmare, because it basically means you have to chop down all the corals in your tank, basically, and dip everything, treat everything outside of that tank. So yeah, that's the biggest nightmare. And our take is we try, because I experienced it myself actually a couple of times when I was a hobbyist, and I know how devastating it is to have pests in your tank, and that's why we rerun the coral farm in a certain way that our corals are 100% pest-free, which means a very long, extensive quarantine period, and constant inspection, of course. And the guarantee basically means that if you get your corals at home, you give them a dip, which we always recommend, just because it's something you always have to do. If you encounter a pest on your frags, you can just toss them away and we will totally refund you. So that's how certain I am. Our corals
That is confidence.
Yeah, I'm just certain corals are free of pests. And that's what the guarantee actually means, because some people ask me, like, how can you guarantee it? What does the guarantee actually means? So this is what the guarantee means. I just know how important it is when you have a reef tank full with Acropora and you want to add that last one extra frag, and that frag is infected and basically destroys your whole tank. You just don't want to have that risk, and that's why we offer this type of product, which is pest-free corals.
Yeah, you're still like the only one around here in Europe, or actually anywhere. I don't know any other coral farm that offers that or promotes that their corals are pest-free.
Yeah, I think there are some other farms that mention it, that their corals are pest-free for sure. I know there are other coral farms that have very extensive quarantine periods. I think it's also the only way to run a coral farm, like a real coral farm, Acropora farm, because you cannot farm any acros if you have pests in your system, because your corals won't grow that much.
You're never going to catch up with a pest in a coral farm, really.
No, you're never going to catch up. So I know for sure all serious Acropora coral farms are pest-free. They have their quarantine protocol. So I'm very sure about that. But we are actually actively promoting it, maybe because I have the experience as a reef keeper, as a hobbyist with those pests. And I know that for me, back in the day, it was very important that corals were pest-free. I just want to explain it to people, and people that are hobbyists like me, that are also think it's very important. They have the reinsurance that they're pest-free. So.
Especially with Acropora, where it's just a pest that is on one Acropora is pretty much guaranteed to infest all your other Acroporas. It's not like, I don't know, if you have one zoanthid, right? And you get a second one, and that second zoanthid has a nudibranch on it. It's only going to be on the zoanthids, right?
Yeah. Well,
but again,
flatworms they basically float through your whole tank. They're not limited to one coral or even one system. If you have different systems connected, they basically float through the water column into all your systems. They do have a tendency to like some corals more, some acros more than the other. But you can be sure that the flatworms are basically everywhere. If you find one coral with flatworms, they're in your whole system.
It's already game over once you find them, right?
Yeah, it's basically game over. Well, you can get rid of them, but it takes a lot of effort. You have to build quarantine tanks. You have to dip everything outside of your tank. There's a lot of effort involved, a lot of headache, and you're definitely going to lose a lot of colonies because of all the dipping. It's just something you only want to experience once. And if you have if you have the energy to restart and go on again after that one very bad experience, I think you're very much more warned and careful about pests, and you don't want to do that twice.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's something everybody always tells you. You don't want pests on your corals, and I mean it makes sense. Nobody wants it, right? But I feel like it's only after you've had it where you really pay attention. You know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But even better that you offer corals that are clean and have no pests on them.
That's that's why we do it, because we don't want people to have this experience at least more than once. So yeah.
What kind of well, you said you always recommend dipping. What's your recommended dip for Acropora? Because there are many dips on the market, obviously.
Yeah, we use basically like our special blend. There's certain types of products combined in there. Our commercial dip of choice would be Coral RX, which is very gentle on the corals, and that's what we recommend hobbyists to use at home. But our quarantine procedures are much more than just dipping. It's basically multiple dips over many, many weeks, changing from one system to the other to prevent reinfection into the same system. A lot of visual inspection with a microscope, where we can actually put a whole coral under. We have special microscopes that basically hold a whole coral, and you can look up to 50 times magnification. So you can spot basically everything that's crawling on there. And we actually are totally rebuilding that part. Then they go into a observation tank, and we extended that tank to a much bigger size, and they go in there for at least half a year after the whole quarantine procedure. So they're basically clean, but they still go into observation.
So they're being tortured for half a year, just so you're absolutely sure they're pest free.
No. They're only tortured for, let's say, 1.5, 2 months. And then they go into recovery, they go into observation tanks, and we don't really treat them actively anymore. And that's basically only observation. So we observe the coral. How is it growing? We just cut off a branch. How does the skeleton look inside? Are there any boring algae in the skeleton? Is there anything weird happening to that coral, which makes us want to put it back into quarantine maybe? And, if that initial half a year of observation, if we don't notice any weird issues and the coral is happy and growing and healthy, then it goes into the farm systems.
So, well, that's a very lengthy process. Imagine doing that at home. I don't know anyone who does that at home, actually.
Yeah,
the few people would.
It's too much to set up all that systems for maybe a few corals that you buy at home. So it just doesn't make sense. But I would definitely recommend dipping all your corals, because that's basically 99% of all the issues. It's not a guarantee if you only dip once, but you will catch a lot. And you will definitely, what we actually do, if a coral comes in with us, we go selecting corals manually. And if we bring those corals back to the farm and we do the initial dip right after we got them, and there's any flatworms on them, or we see colonies coming off a colony, that colony is destroyed. It's not going into the farm. It's not even going into quarantine. So basically the corals that go into quarantine have no visual pests. We make sure it's inspected for flatworms, bugs, etc. If it actually hosts one of them, we're not even putting it in the farm, because there's already tiny risk that it could slip through or whatever. So we just decide to not introduce it into the farm
But that is probably, for a home aquarist, that is probably the hardest call to make, right? You just go out, you get a new frag, you come home, and you're like, well, it had some flatworms on it. What do I do now? I mean, I have like 50, 100 Acropora in my tank, and I've got this one new guy. I just dipped him and got rid of all the flatworms. Do I still put it in?
Yeah. What I would do if you have a tank full of acros, you get a new frag and you find a flatworm, just throw it away. It's not worth the risk.
The way I see it is, you just, let's say you paid €50, $50 for your new frag.
Yeah.
But now, do I throw this out? Now I just burnt €50, $50 for this frag. Did I just burn that? But in hindsight, let's say it does cause a breakout. Would you go back in time and spend 50 extra bucks to not have whatever it is now in your tank? Infested, spread out through all your corals.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah. So even if let's say you get a clean frag, would you still recommend keeping it on a frag rack, for example, for a while to observe? Because you can always assume that this is patient zero. Even if it comes out clean, you give it some time in case something slipped through somehow. You keep it on the frag rack.
Even with our frags, which are clean, I always recommend to keep it on a rack for a while. You can move it up and down. You can see where the corals are the most happy. You can change the flow a bit, and then after like a week, you can think about, I'm going to place this one there, this one there, this one there. You only have to glue them once instead of just moving them around, which causes more stress. So I always recommend to put them on a rack and then decide after a week where to put them. I think that's the best way to go. And you can just inspect them for a couple of weeks or 1 week, and
But in terms of pests, does the frag rack really make a difference in your opinion? If let's say you put a coral in and it's on the frag rack, and
it's easier. Yeah, it's easier to visual inspect. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And visual inspection is still one of the best indicators to notice a pest. So, if there's very close to your front window, you can definitely spot a pest, but you will definitely be too late because it's already in your tank.
Okay, so even if you then spot, let's say, a flatworm, you spot, it's got bites on it, it's too late?
It's potentially too late. It's not certainly too late.
You can still toss it and hope for the best, but
you can still take it out. You can still take it out. There's a higher chance it didn't spread than if you put it in your system for a couple of months. So, yeah. But to prevent that, dip. After arrival, always dip. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. You just cannot be too careful with pests and Acropora.
Yeah.
Because they are really going to ruin your parade.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think that was the last major point.
Yeah.
Maybe to wrap it up.
We covered a lot. Yeah, do you have anything to wrap it up? On a more positive note?
Yeah. Most positive note. Let's end it with, what do you feel like today is your top 3 Acropora? What are your favorites? You know what? Let's go with your favorites. Go with your favorites first.
All right. I actually moved my fox flame colony today, which I haven't really looked at closely for a while, and I thought, this is actually a really nice coral. So I rediscovered my appreciation for the fox flame. So that, I think that's a first.
Did you move it under the halides?
Yeah. I moved it under the halides to see if it's doing even better. Let's see. I would concur. That would also be one of my top favorite acros ever. Yeah. It is really nice, also because it's so unique. I never seen it in an import. I don't know where it comes from originally, but it's just a unique piece, and it really stands out when you see it in the farm compared to other corals. My second and my third one, I think, it's difficult. Yeah, I really have to think. I think at this moment they're both tenuous. I know it's I have a love-hate relationship with Tennois, to be honest. But right now I do like them. I have a few Tennois that are coloring up really well at the moment. They started out as green, just plain green Tennois, but they're developing all these beautiful colors, yellows, oranges, reds. One of them is actually in your video. The last video you shot at our place, which is the Carnival Night.
Oh, yes.
And
a lot of people commenting about that one. And that started out completely green.
It started out completely green. Yeah. Man. And that's also the almost like a gambling aspect of keeping acros, because you buy a green Tennois and then most times it stays green or even becomes dark green. But in some cases it will transform into this coral, and then you have to jackpot, so to speak. Not even in money, but just, the coral is really, really, really amazing. I think it's actually one of my all-time favorites already. And I don't have it that long.
Yeah, it's one of your newer editions. And it's already made the top 3. Yeah. Here you go.
It's one of the newer editions. And I just put it in my show tank as soon as I saw the potential. And I didn't make any frags yet. I will let it grow a little bit more, I guess.
You have me down on your waiting list, right?
Yeah, and probably the first frags I will make will be redundancy frags, just to have 3 or 4 colonies actually.
Yeah, you want to back that one up for sure.
Yeah, I want to back that one up, and after that, I'm gonna probably sell some frags to some people I know, which is even more redundancy in other people's tanks. So that will be my second in my top 3. And the third, there are a lot of Tennois to choose from. I think.
Let's not make it a tenuous.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Make it an underrated coral. What Acropora, in your opinion, is so underrated, but a lot more people should have one?
I think if you put, I also checked out. I have a Miyagi tort, which is a Astera or Tortuosa. And if you just very neon green base with extremely bright blue tips, it's very pretty basic. But if you put that under very, very high light, let's say 700-800 par, it becomes so ridiculously bright. It is really insane. And there's probably nothing as bright green and blue as that coral, if you really give it tons of light and optimal parameters. So that's basically not a very obvious, but that would definitely be in my top 3, at least sometimes. So let's make it my top 3 now. If I have to choose an underdog, that will be the one. But like you already noticed, my top 3, it's very hard to choose my top 3, and it also changes almost on a daily basis.
Well, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah, and Jake Adams always said my favorite coral is the coral that grows best today. And I think that's also a little bit for me, because some corals just are in optimal shape, and those tend to be my favorites. And the next month there's another coral just blossoming, and that's my favorite one. So, it's just very nice to look at a coral that's extremely happy, and that tends to be my favorite for that moment.
Yeah. The favorites are the ones that stay with you, that don't die when your parameters fluctuate.
For sure. I do have some corals that are with me for, I think more than 8 years now. And those are almost like a sentimental value. Like, we've been through so much and we moved farms a couple of times. And I have dead corals longer than my wife, basically. So they have a special place in my heart. Yeah.
Which one would that be? What's your oldest Acropora strain, I should say, in the farm?
I think one of the oldest, really on top of my head, is the Sour Twist, which started as an Australian, very tiny piece. I think a tiny piece of Australian coral that broke off. I saw it at the wholesale and it was just a beautiful coral. So I took it and I grew it out to multiple colonies. And I think it must be in like hundreds of people's tanks across Europe already, because I sold so many frags of it. And it's just one of my old timers in the farm. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that makes it pretty good ending.
Yeah.
Let's end on a positive note.
Yeah. It was nice to talk to you. And
thank you so much for joining tonight.
Yeah. You're welcome. It was very nice to talk to you, and very nice to have you over and do all the filming. And if people have questions, they can just drop them in the comments, right? And,
So if people have questions, you can be the one answering them. I can take a look as well.
I will try to pop in and try to answer them together with you. And
perfect, awesome.
Yeah, hope people enjoyed it.
Yeah, all right.
Hope you enjoyed it. All
awesome.
right. Thank you,
Perfect.
and see you next time.
See you.
All right, bye-bye.